It's 2 in the morning at your RCFE. A resident has fallen. Your caregiver is kneeling beside them, checking for injuries, calling for help. The resident is okay. Shaken, but okay. Now comes the part nobody talks about. Your caregiver has to sit down at a computer, exhausted, adrenaline still running, and write an incident report that satisfies state licensing requirements. Every field matters. Every timestamp matters. Miss a detail, and you're the one explaining it during your next survey. You already know this moment. You've lived some version of it 100 times, but the real fix is far simpler than you think. You've been trained to see incident reports as a burden you manage, a necessary evil, something you assign to whoever's on shift and hope gets done right, something you quietly dread reviewing yourself because half of them come back thin, vague. Missing the one detail a surveyor will ask about 6 months later. But what if the report itself was never supposed to be the hard part? What if the hard part was only ever the writing? Here's the refrain. AI can already write the report, not replace your caregiver's judgment, not decide what happened. It listens or reads a rough account and turns it into a properly formatted, state-compliant incident report in under a minute. Your caregiver still does the thinking. The machine does the typing. Let's slow down, because this is where most facility owners get it wrong. They picture AI as some far-off robot making care decisions on the floor. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is called ambient documentation, and it's already running quietly inside hospitals in your own state right now. Ambient just means the AI is listening in the background while your caregiver talks and building a document from that conversation. No typing. No staring at a blank form at 2 a.m. Just speaking what happened, the way you'd tell a coworker in the hallway. Dr. Eric Topol, a cardiologist and researcher who has spent years studying how AI intersects with clinical work, wrote about this exact shift in his book Deep Medicine. His core finding wasn't that AI makes better diagnoses than humans. It was that AI's biggest gift to caregiving professions is giving people their time back. Time that used to disappear into paperwork. Time that used to come out of the moments spent actually with the person in front of them. He argued that the more we automate the documentation, the more human the caregiving becomes, not the other way around. That should land differently once you've seen it happen on your own floor, and the paperwork burden is not a small thing. Dr. Christine Sinsky, a researcher who has spent over a decade studying physician and clinical staff time for the American Medical Association, published a widely cited study in the Annals of Internal Medicine. It found that for every hour of direct patient care, nearly 2 hours went into documentation and administrative work. 2 hours of writing for every 1 hour of caring. Does that ratio sound familiar to what happens on your floor? Now think about your caregivers specifically. They're not paid like clinicians. They're not trained like clinicians. Yet you're asking them to absorb the exact same documentation burden that researchers found was already breaking down clinical staff with far more support around them. Now here's the twist, and it's the part that surprises most owners. You'd think adding AI to the documentation process would make caregivers write less, cut corners, get lazy. The opposite happens. When the friction of formatting disappears, people write more, not less. A Stanford medicine research team studying ambient documentation tools found that clinicians using them included more detail in their notes than before, not less, because talking through what happened is simply easier than typing it into rigid boxes. The barrier wasn't the information. The barrier was the keyboard. Think about what that means for your RCFE or ARF. Your caregiver isn't avoiding detail because they don't care. They're avoiding it because after a 12-hour shift, formatting a report with the right timestamp fields, the right resident identifiers, the right state-mandated language feels like homework nobody has energy for. Remove that friction, and the report gets more complete, not less. More complete reports mean fewer callbacks from your licensing agency. Fewer callbacks mean fewer afternoons spent explaining a report that was rushed at 2 a.m. And fewer thin reports sitting in a resident's file the day a surveyor decides to pull it. Here's what this actually looks like on your floor. Your caregiver finishes checking on the resident. Instead of opening a blank form, they open a simple app on a tablet or phone and just talk. Resident was found on the floor near the bathroom at 2:14 a.m. No visible injury. Vitals stable. Notified on-call nurse and family at 2:30. That's it. That's all they have to do. The AI takes that spoken account and builds the actual incident report, mapped to the exact fields your state requires, formatted the way your licensing agency expects to see it, ready for a supervisor to review and sign off. What used to take 20 minutes of frustrated typing now takes 90 seconds of talking. Now picture a second scenario, because falls aren't the only report your staff dreads. A medication is given 10 minutes late because a caregiver was pulled to help with another resident. Under the old system, that gets quietly skipped. Nobody wants to write it up. It feels like admitting fault, and writing it up takes almost as long as the mistake took to happen. That's how small errors turn into patterns nobody catches until a survey finds them. With ambient documentation, your caregiver says what happened in one sentence. The AI drafts the medication variance report in the correct format, and it actually gets filed. Not because your staff suddenly became more diligent, because the effort of filing it dropped from 20 minutes to 90 seconds. You might be wondering if this creates a liability risk. Won't the AI put words in someone's mouth? No, and this is the key distinction. The AI doesn't invent anything. It only structures what was actually said. Your caregiver reviews the draft before it's submitted, just like they would review anything they typed themselves. The difference is they are reviewing a finished draft instead of building one from nothing while running on no sleep. That single shift, from creator to reviewer, is where the real-time savings live. It's also where the real accuracy gains live, because reviewing a full draft catches missing details far better than staring at an empty box ever did. And the format problem is bigger than most owners realize, because it isn't just one form. Your state has one set of required fields for a fall, a different set for medication error, a different set again for an elopement or an altered mental status change. Ask any administrator how many different incident templates they are juggling, and most can't give you a clean number. That's not a training failure. That's just too many formats for any one person to hold in their head at 2 a.m. An AI tool doesn't get tired of remembering which template goes with which event. It pulls the correct one automatically every single time based on what your caregiver actually described. Consistency, the thing every surveyor is really looking for across a resident's file, stops depending on which caregiver happened to be on shift that night. Think about what a single missing or vague incident report actually costs you. It's rarely just the report itself. It's the follow-up call from your licensing office asking for clarification weeks later when nobody remembers the details clearly anymore. It's the deficiency citation that shows up on your public survey record, the same record a family researches before they ever tour your building. It's the hours you personally spend rebuilding a timeline from memory because the original write-up was 3 rushed sentences. All of that traces back to the same root cause. Someone exhausted, at the worst possible hour, staring at a form that was never designed with them in mind. There's a quieter cost to the old way too, one you rarely put a number on. Caregiver turnover. Ask any operator why a good caregiver left, and paperwork frustration comes up more often than pay. Dr. Sinsky's research found the same pattern in clinical burnout studies, that administrative burden, not patient care itself, was one of the strongest predictors of people leaving the profession entirely. Every hour your caregiver spends fighting a form is an hour that makes them a little more likely to walk. Remove that fight, and you're not just fixing paperwork. You're protecting the staff you spent months training to replace. Now widen the lens. Because this isn't really about incident reports. It's about every piece of documentation your business generates that someone dreads writing. Every small business owner has some version of this 2 a.m. incident report. A contractor writing up a job site safety issue before the crew forgets the details. A restaurant manager filing a health code correction log after an inspector leaves. A retail manager documenting a workplace injury for insurance before the story gets fuzzy. Same problem every time. Someone who knows exactly what happened, stuck translating it into the correct format, under pressure after the fact, usually at the end of an already long day. The pattern researchers keep finding, across every one of these industries, is the same one Sinsky found in clinical settings. The knowledge was never missing. The willingness was never missing. The bottleneck was always the translation from what someone knows into the format someone else requires. AI closes that gap by doing the translating, and leaving the knowing to the human who was actually there. Topol's point about giving people their time back applies just as much to a shift supervisor at a warehouse as it does to a caregiver at your facility. So if you run an RCFE or ARF, this isn't a hypothetical for next year. Ambient. Speech-to-report tools already exist, already work with plain audio or dictated notes, and already produce documents your caregivers can review and submit the same night. You don't need to buy new hardware. You don't need to retrain your entire staff on new software. You need a caregiver, a phone, and a tool that listens. And if you don't run a care facility at all, ask yourself where your own version of the 2 a.m. incident report lives. The overdue invoice note nobody wants to write. The compliance log that always gets backfilled on a Friday because nobody had time on Tuesday. The customer complaint summary that sits half-finished in a drafts folder for a week. Somewhere in your business, someone already knows exactly what happened. They're just stuck typing it into the right shape. It's 2 in the morning again. Your caregiver kneels beside a resident who's okay, shaken but okay. This time, instead of sitting down to a blank form, they just talk. 90 seconds later, the report writes itself.